So I want to talk a little bit about that public R1 university, right? So, we're here at the University of Michigan. You're a world-class global research university. You're also a state university in this day and age, which requires a lot of balancing. And I think when people hear the University of Michigan, they think of where we are right now in Ann Arbor. But as you mentioned, you have these campuses also in Dearborn and in Flint. So how do you think about the different purposes of each of these campuses, and how do you define the community that's part of each? So, how do you balance this idea of Michigan being part of the world, but important to this state of Michigan, but also to these communities that you're in?
It's something that I take very seriously, and if you look at the history of the development of the University of Michigan system, if you think about the birth of the University of Michigan initially in Detroit and then migrating here to Ann Arbor, which was at its founding a very sleepy place with lots of fields and animals grazing. If you look at a picture of the original University of Michigan campus in Ann Arbor, it was very small, just a few buildings. And so if you think about how the university grew, it was because of the state. And I often like to say that this is not the University of Michigan, it's the University for Michigan. I truly believe, and many people in the institution believe, that we owe something to the state of Michigan. And that's something that people feel very fervently. You're absolutely right that over the history of the university, as it grew from one campus into a system of 3 universities, that each of the additional campuses, Flint and then Dearborn, served a different community. Communities that have evolved over time, but have been critical for the success of the state of Michigan. Both Flint and Dearborn were very, very important, continue to be very important, but were very important as the state grew and succeeded in the auto industry. But they're very different towns as well in terms of their demographics, in terms of the focus of those campuses, in terms of the kinds of priorities, in terms of, for example, practice-based education at Dearborn, but also the demographics in those 2 different cities. And I think the university takes very seriously our role in each of these 3 different locations. We have great leaders of all 3 campuses, in Flint with Donna Fry and Domenico Grasso at Dearborn. And I'm really proud of their strategic thinking. I'm very proud of the role that each campus plays in their cities, but also the synergy that exists that we hope to grow between the 3 campuses.
So let's dive into the Ann Arbor campus where we are specifically. And you've noted to us beforehand that you all have 150 programs in the top 10 globally. Just an incredible, stunning, breadth and depth of excellence at the university. You all are obviously a magnet for talent around the world. Among undergrad applicants, you admit less than 1 out of every 5 applicants. You conduct research on pressing challenges confronting humanity, such as climate change, which we'll get into in the second half of the show. But you're also in the backyard of Detroit. As you mentioned, you were once located there. You're a state institution in Michigan. I'm just sort of curious about how you think about the intersection, though, of those overlapping communities and perhaps missions. And where are there synergies, but where are there tensions or trade-offs that you have to make? And how do you see those evolving right now?
I think that the University of Michigan takes seriously all of these sort of concentric circles of responsibility. As I was mentioning in my previous response, we owe a great deal to the state of Michigan, but also to Detroit, where we were founded, but we still have extensive and likely a growing presence. And so that is something that we will continue to be a priority. But as you have said, the University of Michigan now, in terms of its activities, educational activities, research activities, and healthcare, we really span the entire state of Michigan and our neighboring states as well in terms of the collaborations that we have in terms of research and outreach. But as you say, we also are members of both hemispheric and global organizations, like the University Climate Change Coalition as a hemispheric set of a network of institutions focused on climate action. We take that very, very seriously. And we also believe, because of the strength of our faculty, what I like to call breadth at scale, excellence at scale, that we have a responsibility because of our size, the excellence of our faculty, staff, and students, that there are very few institutions that have the excellence, the breadth, and the number of people that we graduate and individuals who train here and who go to other institutions, very few institutions that can really have a transformative impact on the most vexing problems that we face as a civilization. So we take that responsibility very, very seriously. I have an opportunity to talk to the leadership of this institution on a regular basis. Just this morning, I was speaking to the deans of the university, and we talk about what our strategy will be moving into the future over the next 10 years. We're in the midst of a strategic visioning process. And so we've been through this visioning process, which is about three quarters of the way done. And one of the things that's very striking from the thousands of inputs that we've received is that if you look at all of those, there's a passion for each of these responsibilities. For our responsibility for Ann Arbor, Dearborn and Flint, for Detroit, for the state of Michigan, and our desire to have a transformative impact on the world. So it's not me, it's the entire community, and I'm very proud of that.
Okay, so I want to stay there for a minute because big public universities, local community leaders, states like to point fingers at them and say, you're not quite doing enough for the state. We know, for example, across the country right now, that trust in higher education has dropped to historic lows. People just don't think it's doing enough as an institution, big I institution across the country, enough for the issues that we're facing today. So how do you combat these perceptions that Michigan is just this elite public university now?
I would say, and I've speak to all people around the state, politicians, and all people at the federal level as well, that you'd have to ask them, but I would say that they have noticed that we're at the table more, that we take this responsibility even more seriously than we have. I would argue that the University of Michigan has been involved at each of these levels of responsibility for a long time. But I'm very proud of the fact that our leaders, our deans, our faculty, and our students are very involved at each of these levels through activism, through service. If you look at any of these initiatives that are occurring, say at the state level, to your point, we are really ramping up what we do, for example, in terms of economic development and technology transfer in the state. The governor has really responded, lieutenant governor has really responded by including us on significant committees and commissions. We are very involved with the other universities in the state, not only the R1 universities, but community colleges, to really think about how to create the talent and to retain the talent that's going to be required for the vibrancy of the state economy. And we're also engaged very actively with other institutions, but also the federal government, ensuring that we remain competitive as a nation. And so I would say that I think that if you talk to people, I hope that they will point out that we're at the table and we're very engaged and we're ramping up our involvement.
So what do you think, you've been obviously in higher ed for a long time, what do you think is at the center then of this lack of trust or this declining trust in higher education writ large across the country?
I think it's multifactorial. I think that one, it's an issue of communication. I think that the sort of view that universities have for a long time been ivory towers is partially true. Universities haven't been very good at articulating their commitment, their passion, haven't really gone outside of the campus boundaries in some cases. I don't think it's true at Michigan. So part of it's communication. And if you don't talk about your involvement, people don't know about it and assume that it's not happening. So part of it is communication. I would say the other part of the distrust has to do with the question of ROI, whether or not people really believe that what students are experiencing on campus, in the classroom, in the laboratory, how it relates to their future careers, and their future impact on the community and on society in general. And so I think that it's time for introspection, and we're doing that as an institution, and the sector is doing that as well. I think it's healthy. Many things have changed since I was a college student. And so it is important, I think, for all of us to think about how we integrate into society, how we start to look at what we teach and how we can prepare our future graduates to contribute to different fields. So I think it's very healthy. It's happened in entire history of higher education, and this is a good time for us to do that as well. So part of it is an appropriate question of alignment of what we do in the wants and needs of society, but as also in terms of what our students want.
Mm-hmm.
Students are different from when you and I were in college, and we need to listen to them and incorporate that into the path forward. And I think it's healthy.
So there's the talk, communicate, there's the walk, and ROI, and so forth. The other part of this that you've mentioned to us is that you've said, we want to play a bigger role in elevating Detroit. I'd love to know what that looks like tactically and on the ground.
Yeah, and I think it would be amiss for me not to mention that part of the issue has to do with a counter-narrative about the value of critical discourse, of asking difficult questions, not only internally, but also of government, of society, of social mobility. And I think it's exceedingly important at these times for universities to remain committed to truth, to evidence-based decision-making, to reinforcing the importance of diversity of thought, of civil discourse. And I think that many institutions have varied from that from decades ago. And it's particularly important for us to recommit to that because there's the cornerstone of a just society is that kind of freedom of expression, diversity of ideas, and civil discourse. And in the absence of that, we lose one of the great attributes of a university is a diverse set of opinions, of perspectives that together actually inform the best path forward.
No, that makes sense. Let's go to the Detroit one just briefly. Just talk about tactically what your work in elevating Detroit looks like.
Well, one of the first people that I had the privilege of meeting when I arrived here in Michigan was the mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, who's a proud graduate of the University of Michigan. And he's incredibly passionate about Detroit. He loves Detroit like no one I've met. And he's been very, very successful. There's really a renaissance of sorts that you can see if you go there. I encourage you to go there. There are incredible restaurants, wonderful museums. The orchestra is really fantastic. You can see, even within the year that I've been here, the impact of that kind of focused effort. Go into the mayor's council room. There are all kinds of charts. And he holds everyone accountable, including myself, even though I don't work for him, to really be part of the solution to make Detroit better. And his enthusiasm is infectious. I want to be his partner because, as I said, the University of Michigan, the resources that we have, the place that we hold in higher education is due to the success of Detroit, is due to the success of Michigan. And we owe something back to Detroit and to Michigan to help make this an even more vibrant and economically successful part of the United States.
And do you believe, just quick follow-up on that, do you believe that the citizens of Detroit and of Michigan believe that?
Well, I would say that we have work to do.
Okay.
So to answer your question, but how are we doing this? I'm sitting down, and the deans, other heads of department are sitting down. We have hundreds of interactions across Detroit in education, in healthcare, in economic development, in innovation, and we're going to ramp that up. And so that's how we're actually doing it. We There's no substitute to rolling up your sleeves and working together, developing plans. And that's not just with the mayor, it's his entire team. And I think that's going to continue to grow. Investments that are taking place in terms of infrastructure and programs are just breathtaking in the space. For example, education as an example. We're going to invest more in K through 12 education in Detroit, in our Marshall Family School of Education. I'm very proud of their role with that. But that's just one example. But in terms of your question, Jeff, a university, a leader has to earn the trust of a community. And all institutions have to be introspective and hold themselves accountable to whether they have always been there. This is not a situation where an institution or a unit can come in and interact for a short period of time, then back away. It has to be a sustained partnership. And so you've got to earn their trust. You also have to, I think, as an institution, as a leader, as a professor, as a student, lead with listening, and not go into a community with all the answers, but understand that when you lead with humility and you understand that it's an equal partnership, that you can accomplish much more.
So one other question before we open it up to audience questions. Again, use the QR code to ask questions, and we'll ask them from the stage here. So we were talking before we got on stage about football, and obviously the Big Ten conference has expanded again.
It's no longer 10.
No longer 10. Hasn't been 10 for quite some time. But the other thing that we talk a lot on this podcast about is the future of higher ed in terms of mergers and acquisitions, but more alliances, and how universities can work more together. And I've done a lot of work on the Big Ten over the years in terms of the history of the conference, and which really started out as an academic conference more than athletics. And one of the things that I think really differs the Big Ten conference from every other athletic conference, and you know this from being in other athletic conferences, is that academic component, the Big Ten Academic Alliance. So what else can the Big Ten do as the conference expands, as we think about the power of all of these institutions now that are going to be in the Big Ten to solve the big challenges facing the U.S.? Do you imagine the Big Ten Academic Alliance and the alliance aspect of it to become bigger as a result of the expansion?
Well, certainly there are more institutions, and I can tell you, as a member of the expansion committee of sorts, within the committee and presidents and chancellors, that as has been the case for a long time at the Big Ten, the strength of current and prospective members of the conference, one of the most important things that is considered is their strength as a research university, most of them public, as you know, with a few exceptions.
Two now, right?
That's right.
Yeah, two.
That's right.
Used to be one, but
used to be one.
Yeah.
Northwestern, and there used to be University of Chicago, my alma mater.
Right.
Yeah, that's.
But it's incredibly important. I've been in other conferences. There's actually a facility, a vibrant facility in Chicago, where that alliance members meet, not only presidents but also faculty members, students, and deans, and a lot of wonderful things have happened because of that alliance. And I can tell you in my conversations with the other presidents and chancellors that not only is that integral to each of our identities, but it is one of the most attractive features of the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. I'm really proud of the fact that the University of Michigan, when you go to the Union, where the steps of which John F. Kennedy articulated his vision of a Peace Corps, I think at 2 a.m. in the morning, something like that, that on the sides of that front door are a scholar and an athlete. And some people often ask me, why is that important? Well, we are a very large institution with 19 schools, an incredible amount of activity just in Ann Arbor. But if I compare the University of Chicago and University of Michigan, I've been at both, I'm proud of both. there's something special about the athlete part. The way it brings people together in the big house, over 105, 112,000 people coming together. And if you actually walk around, you'll see people from Michigan medicine, from kinesiology, from SMTD, LSNA, from engineering, all cheering for the same team. And there's a saying, the team, the team, the team. And what's really special about the University of Michigan is whether it's athletics, any of the sports, whether it's research, or whether it's teaching, there's an esprit de corps that I've never seen anywhere. And I think that's part of the secret sauce of what makes the University of Michigan special, is that people will come together, maybe at a football game, maybe at a coffee house, and they'll talk about ideas. You know, I've been to many alumni events for different institutions, and what's unique about the University of Michigan is they'll talk a lot before the event, and they'll stay the longest.
I won't ask what alumni enthusiasm does for your sleep schedule, but as we move to Q&A, there's a few questions, but for time's sake, we're going to just do one right now, which is that someone wrote, I imagine that admissions at such a competitive public university is quite complicated. A lot of your counterparts in the private university space can prioritize what they choose in admissions, financials, racial equity, things like that. But you also have to consider whether you are serving Michigan's best interests. How do you balance that, especially given the revenue disparity potential with out-of-state students versus in-state?
Well, we are discussing this actively. Several aspects of your question. It's multifaceted what you ask. You're right. I mean, 1 in 5 is just the general selectivity. If you look at, for example, musical theater or robotics, it could be up as low as 3% of the students are accepted. So there are students that I know who have applied to Ivy League schools in Michigan, gotten into Ivy League schools and not Michigan. Right. That is something that we think about. We think about, are we the right size? We are large. We are now the largest public university in the state of Michigan. But if you, Jeff, as you've written, if you compare our size to Toronto or Arizona State or UBC, we're significantly smaller. And so I've asked just a fundamental question to our deans, do you want to grow? And the answer from most of them is yes, but only if we can provide a quality of educational student experience that they deserve. So we're not just growing, and we're not going to grow for the sake of growing, but Jeff, you're right, there is something that we need to think about seriously about, do we make the Michigan educational experience, the total experience, available to more people? Because there's an important role public universities play. If you count all the graduates from the elite privates, they don't have the output that we do. So if you look at Michigan, Michigan State, Wayne State, Ohio State, Illinois, the Big Ten universities, our output is enormous. And so we have a responsibility to provide an uncommon education to the common person, which is kind of our foundation to what we do as an institution. So we need to think about it. We are thinking about it. That's part of your question. The other part of your question was the differential in in-state versus out-of-state. I actually think if you think about how we were founded, we're not really a land grant. The proportion of students here that are out-of-state is higher than at many other public universities. I actually think it's pretty healthy where it is. I wouldn't want it to change much more. I do worry about, to part of your question, whether we should grow so that more qualified Michigan students can come. But I actually think there is something that's positive to bringing the different kinds of people, students, personalities, perspectives from across America together in one campus. And so if you think about 36,000 undergrads, I think it's enriching for someone to be in a classroom, a laboratory, in a residence hall with people not only from Michigan, but people from the coasts. And it's actually good for the country, actually, as well. So We have to look at the right number, but I think that the mix is kind of magical.